Hello everyone, I hope you're well. Today's video is going to be a discussion video about the Salem witch trials because that topic really interests me and I'm currently reading a book about it. So I'm going to talk about the book, I'm then going to tell you about the Salem witch trials, tell you about what people think happened at the Salem witch trials and then give my opinions on it. So, first up about the book, I'm reading The Devil in Massachusetts, a modern inquiry into the Salem witch trials by Marion L. Starkey. This is non-fiction, it was originally published in 1949, and it's just Marion breaking down everything that happened in Salem Village that year. So at the beginning she's talking about life in Salem, life for the girls in Salem, and they're just taking you through everything that happens, everyone that was arrested, a little bit of backstory onto everyone that was arrested, and then what happened to everyone. Haven't finished it yet, absolutely adoring it, so much information. I'm writing notes of like who's being arrested. I've then started doing family trees because a lot of people in Salem are connected in some way. Loving this book so much. So I'm just going to give you a brief breakdown of what happened at Salem Village. Very brief breakdown. So it happened in 1692. It was in the small village of Salem that all of a sudden the young girls started convulsing. They started being really sick. They'd start screaming, and if anyone mentioned God, they'd put their hands over their little ears, and the village was obviously extremely religious. Then those girls said that witches had got to them and that they were victims of witchcraft. So the girls themselves were never seen as witches, they were victims. And then they started pointing at people in the village and saying, that person's a witch, that person's a wizard, that person's done this to me. And all those people got arrested. There was a court set up and there were little court cases, but they weren't really in depth. They were just, you know, the girls have accused you of this, so you must have done it. So these people got arrested, thrown in prison, and then some of them got hung. Some of them got released. There was over 100 arrests. And something that's really curious about this whole thing is that it was such a massive thing, but it was over in a year. So 1692 is when it kicked off, and then the last Salem witch trial was at the beginning of 1693. So within a year really it had all settled down, and that's because the people of the village revolted against the Salem witch trials and they said that this isn't right, everyone's in prison, how can everyone be a witch, we don't believe in this anymore. And that's how it all just died down. So that's the brief plot of what happened at the Salem witch trial. I don't know why I'm saying plot, like it did happen in real life, but it just seems like such an odd thing to happen. Marion in her book, I'll just briefly tell you, is that she talks about what life was like for the girls who said that they were victims of witchcraft before they said all that. So in the village, the women in the village, their job was to have children, to look after the home, to care, to cook, to clean, to do all that kind of stuff. The men's job was to the running of Salem, to hunt for their family, get food, security, that was their kind of jobs. And the boys' jobs were kind of apprentices to the men because that was going to be their job one day. However, the girls' jobs, they didn't really do a lot. And Marion talks about it, how the girls, they didn't have any worth in the village unless they were married and had children. So young girls just were kind of ignored, no one cared for them. Some of the older ones who were like in their 20s, they were maids and just waiting to get married, waiting to have children. That was like their big thing to have in life. Whereas the kind of girls like 8 and 12, no one really cared for them. No one wanted to do anything with them. And Marion talks about how Salem Village was a society set up without children in mind. So there was nowhere for these girls to go and do. They would just kind of sometimes help out with chores but be very neglected. Like people wouldn't even talk to them. They just didn't care about them in any kind of way. So you have this group of girls who no one really cares about because that's just the setup of the village. You then have Betty, who's 8 years old, whose dad is a reverend. She has a slave called Tituba, and Tituba was originally from Barbados, and all the girls would congregate at Betty's house and listen to Tituba's stories, and Tituba would do tricks and tell them all these different stories. And then not long after the girls started congregating at Betty's to listen to Tituba, one of the girls became very sick, and then Betty and Abigail became very sick. Betty was 8, Abigail was 11, they were cousins, and then Anne Putman, who was 12, she became very sick and they said it's Tituba. she is the witch, which I think is incredibly cruel, because Tituba didn't need to tell them those stories. She just, when like the adults weren't paying them attention, she used to be nice and tell them stories while she was doing like her work and stuff. And so they all kind of turned on Tituba, and then it turned into a massive witch hunt, and that's what happened. Marion's theory as to why this happened, why those girls started convulsing, being really sick, shrieking, screaming, why did they start behaving like that? Marion thinks it's because the girls were so neglected, they just wanted attention, and so the young 3 girls did it for attention and a little bit of someone like caring that they were alive. But then she said the older girls, who were in their late teens and their 20s, they did it out of spite. They started copying the young girls because they saw, oh, this is getting a bit of attention. And then the people that they were accusing of being witches were like their boss, which was just like, oh god. Like one of them, Mary Warren, she was 20 years old and she was a maid servant to the Proctors, and she just said that her like boss, the man and woman, was a witch and a wizard and that they were terrible people, and so they got arrested and taken away, and she got their house whilst they were in prison and awaiting like their sentence and everything. She got to stay in their house. But the Proctors had 5 children, so she was left alone to raise these 5 children, and it was her duty to do that. And she changed her story. And I find that very interesting, because she then said, actually the Proctors aren't witches and wizards, like I just said it, and she got arrested. And then when she'd spent a bit of time in prison, she said, oh actually I'm wrong again, they are witches and wizards. So they were released, she was released, and they were kept in prison, and she had to raise their 5 children, which I'm sure was very difficult for her. This is really interesting how Marion kind of goes into each character and who they're accusing, and the accused backstory and the accused backstory to the girl. A lot of people were accused of witchcraft though, just for like scandalous behaviour at the time. So one woman, she was living with a man, she wasn't married to him. They eventually got married, but people were like, they were definitely doing something before they got married. Witch. Another one, she wore exotic clothing sometimes. Witch. Like there were little things like that. And one of them, her children had smallpox, and like she was quite poor and she'd taken to begging at people's houses in the village. People were getting really sick and tired of that. Witch. The saddest one is that one of the women, the one who would beg around people's houses, she had a child called Dorcas, who was a little girl. No one knows the exact age, they just know that Dorcas was under the age of 6, and this 6-year-old girl was put in prison. And I just find that so sad that this little 6-year-old was accused of being a witch and thrown in prison. It's terrible. And that same woman, let me get her name, she gave birth in prison. Her name was Sarah Good. And she gave birth in prison, and the prison guards wouldn't take the baby out and give it to someone in Salem village because Sarah Good was seen as a witch. And so the baby actually just died in prison because the prison was so filthy. Like, it's just so sad, like all these different stories, absolutely tragic. And a lot of people have different opinions. So as I said, Marion thinks the girls were just doing it for a little bit of attention, and then it all just spiraled out of complete control. And then the girls would say one thing and people would be like, that's a witch, and kind of interpret what people were saying. One of them, oh my god, it's just so sad, because one of them was a 71-year-old woman who, she was just sick in bed, and they were like, oh, she's sick in bed, she's a witch, and she got thrown in prison. I found that one so like heartbreakingly sad, and it was like whole families of people as well. So that's the Marion's opinion. I'm now going to go into other people's opinion as what was happening at Salem, because people do still see this as a mystery. Why did these girls start behaving like this? Was it attention? I mean, some of it was quite extreme. It was like convulsing to the point where they'd injure themselves. One of them nearly killed herself by throwing herself into a fire. It was very extreme behaviour. And also remember that these girls just kind of knew Salem village. They'd been to other villages that were very similar, but they knew Salem village. They didn't have an outside port of ideas and different things. They just knew family, the Bible, family, the Bible. So why do they react in such an odd way? It's not like it could be an outside influence. One thing that I do find is overlooked quite a lot is that one of the girls, she had lived in Boston, and near Boston there had been a similar incident of these girls acting out, and then there'd been a witch trial. So I don't know whether maybe she could have told the other girls. It's not sure whether she even knew about the thing that was happening in Boston. No one knows. No one knows if she came into contact with it, although Marion says maybe the girl could have gone to the hangings of the witch with her family, because families did used to go to hangings as a family occasion, a family pastime. So maybe she went to one of the hangings of the witches and then was told, and then she was moved to Salem village and then kind of told everyone else the story. We don't know. There's no evidence to that she ever had any contact. I just find it interesting that she was in Boston at the time. Somewhere else in Boston there was all this witch hysteria. So people think it could be that. I think it could be that, and then she could have told the girls and they all kind of overreacted because they didn't know what witches were, and they might have thought, am I a witch? Am I a victim of witchcraft? What's going on here? Other people think the girls could have been mentally ill. They could have had something like schizophrenia. Other people believe that the girls could have actually had a disease, and a disease that wasn't known in Salem witch trial. It's something like a parasite that gets into your skin and it burrows into your skin, and then it can get you sick and convulsing and all these different things. Other people believe, however, that the girls could have been a victim of sexual abuse. I first heard this theory when I was watching an interview with Arthur Miller. I love Arthur Miller. He was a very famous playwright. His famous stuff is like A View from a Bridge, you probably know about, All My Sons, Death of a Salesman, and he also wrote a play about the Salem witch trials, which is called The Crucible, which I really like. The Crucible, and it's just hysteria. So he's just kind of, they're all shouting, you're a witch, you're a witch, you're a witch. It's just the hysteria of the time. But after that play came out, he was asked in an interview, what do you think the Salem witch trials were about? Do you think the girls were possessed? What do you think? And he thought that the girls were sexually abused. And he'd done a lot of research to write the play The Crucible. And he thought that maybe the girls could have been victims of sexual abuse, and they didn't know what sex was or rape was or anything. They didn't have that vocabulary to talk about it. And so they would just say stuff like, the devil came to me at night, the devil's inside of me, and all this different stuff that he thought could have alluded to that the girls were being abused. I think that could be true, because if you think about the time and sexual abuse was rampant, and I do think about the older girls, how they turned on their like masters, if you like, and said, he's a wizard, she's a witch. Maybe their, you know, masters were abusing them, and that's why they did it out of vengeance, because they were being sexually abused. And maybe the three young girls who originally, sorry about that, my camera just timed out, I'm going back into it. So maybe the original three girls were sexually abused by someone, but they just didn't know how to say it, and so they thought that they were the devil in some kind of way, and there was something really wrong with them. We will never know. I don't know. I don't think we'll ever really know. And Marion even says, if you were trying to like work this out, it would take your whole lifetime, because there's so much information as to what happened, but then there's so much lost information because the girls were all interviewed as one, so they weren't individually interrogated. We just have them talking as one, and she describes them in the book as like a chorus of voices talking, where you need to just talk to them one-on-one really to find out what was going on with each of them. Maybe there was different issues with them. Maybe one was mentally ill, like Anne Patman, you know, her mum was very ill, seeing these dead babies. Maybe Anne was very ill. Maybe Betty had an illness. Like we don't know. It just all happened so quickly. What are your opinions? My opinions is that I think it could have been sexual abuse with the three young ones, so the 8-year-old, the 11-year-old and the 12-year-old, because they became very sick, and the things that they were saying does kind of lead that someone was doing something bad to them, but they didn't know how to express it. They didn't know what it was, and so they were in complete shock and started convulsing and saying, I'm the devil, I'm a terrible person, it's all my fault, and becoming very sick, and they couldn't sleep. So it could have been something to do with abuse. I think Marion's thing about the older girls maybe doing it out of a bit of spite, I think could be true, although I do find that quite harsh, because they were all raised so religious. I just don't know how you could really break that. And like a thing that I want to say about that is that people who are extremely religious do not take polygraph tests. And the reason they don't take polygraph tests is because they don't lie. And the first thing, when you're strapped up to a polygraph machine, the first thing they tell you to do is they say, you have got to tell a lie. So I'm going to ask you a question, you say yes or no, but you have to lie, so that we can work out where your kind of like stats are for lying, and then the polygraph test begins. A lot of religious people cannot lie because it is a sin. They can't even lie to help an investigation in a polygraph test because it is a sin to them. So these girls were raised so religiously, and they had no outside influence, just the church. I just don't know if they'd start making up lies. Like, it seems very out of character considering how they did believe in hell and they did believe in the devil. And I just don't know how they turn against that. All of them turn against it at the same time. It's such a mystery, it's such an odd case, but it's also really devastating. And you can think about the Salem witch trials and like, oh, that was sad and different stuff. When you really read about it and you read about, you know, a 6-year-old girl being thrown in a prison, a woman giving birth in prison and the prison guards allowing her baby to die with her, and then another woman, she was elderly and she was thrown in prison, she just died in prison because the prisons were so badly maintained. There were sewers, like actual sewers with rats biting at them, and people used to come to the prison to look at these witches like there were circus animals, just stare at them. Oh, it's just so tragic, the whole entire thing. So my theory is that maybe they could have been sexually abused, maybe the older ones were being abused by their masters and that's why they turned on them so quickly. I'm not sure though. I still don't have a definitive answer, and every documentary that you watch they're like, there is no definitive answer, it just happened so quickly and the girls were so in sync. And that's what's so odd about it. They were all behaving the same, but there's no proof that they had a discussion before and decided what they were going to do. And also, how can an 8-year-old keep up with a 20-year-old? Because Betty was 8 years old and she was doing the same things that the 20-year-old girl was doing. It just makes like no kind of sense. And I don't know if you were play acting and trying to get a bit of attention, whether you would throw yourself in a fire and nearly kill yourself. I just don't know if you'd have the ability to do that. I don't think we'll ever know really what happened at the Salem witch trials and why all these girls reacted the way they did. I think there were different things for different people. So I think the younger ones could have been going through sexual abuse. The older ones saw it as an example to get revenge from their sexual abuse. Or maybe some of them just did it out of kind of spite because the people who they were the maids to were really cruel to them. I don't think we'll ever know. I don't know, maybe they all did it out of spite like Marion thinks. They all did it for attention and it got completely out of control. And the adults were taking what these teenage girls were saying as facts. There was no interrogation of these girls, just everything was being taken so literal. Maybe the girls got a bit crazy with the power of it. I don't know. Tell me down below what your opinions are. What do you think happened in the Salem witch trials? Tell me if you've read any books or seen any documentaries on it. I've probably seen them because I really do read a lot about the Salem witch trials. I find it really interesting and also just really heartbreaking. So this book is a book I would definitely recommend, even though I haven't finished reading it. Like I'm on page, I'll tell you what page I'm on, 148, and already you can see from my notes like how much information is in this. It's just unbelievable how much she manages to get into it, but it's such an easy read and you really feel like she's giving justice to everyone. So everyone that was accused, obviously there's a lot of people to get through, but she really goes into a backstory of each of them and their characters and their personalities, and I really like that within the book. So I'm going to end the video here because I could talk all day about this topic. Tell me what you think down below and I'll see you again soon for another video.